Welcome to Resilience in Action podcast. I'm here with Sarbeswar Praharaj. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Geography and Sustainable Development, and he's the director of the Master of Professional Science in Urban Sustainability and Resilience, and he is a Climate Resilience Institute faculty affiliate. So, welcome to Resilience in Action.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to this discussion.
Yeah. So maybe just start off. Give us a little bit of grounding about, sort of your professional background and your areas of interest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm an assistant professor, as you said, but I have, traversed different disciplines and different roles throughout my career over the last 10, 15 years. Started being a geographer. I took a lot of interest in how GIS could transform lives. Technology could be used to, better understand cities. And then I came into urban planning field, which is the second kind of my home. So geography and urban planning is kind of interrelated, and I took a lot of interest in how geospatial technologies, especially, could be better supporting urban planning, and that's where I did my masters and PhDs and in back in Australia, and then here I am as an assistant professor. So I continue to invest a lot of resources and in understanding how emerging technologies, not just the geospatial technologies we know, but how the emerging technologies is influencing or potentially going to influence in future on how we plan cities, especially in the changing climate.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's not surprising that a geographer and urban planning specialist, a planner, would be interested in resilience, because resilience is so place-based most of the time. Like, there are things that are not place-based, but a lot of the elements that make a community more fragile or more resilient come down to place.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's both the place and also the cross-sectional nature of systems that define what resilience is, and that's where I think geography plays a critical role. Geography is about understanding the earth systems, right? And when you talk about earth systems, it's about how physical systems like climates and environmental resources intersect with human systems, right? Like our people and social structures, infrastructure systems. So I think geospatial technology plays a pivotal role in breaking down these silos and really bringing together the data sets and understandings in a really integrated manner to then help us understand how resilience should be designed and architected in a way that affects these different systems together collectively.
Yeah. And this interdisciplinary work that you're talking about is in some ways fundamental to the role of the chief resilience officer. But I just got to the University of Miami 3 years ago, kind of around when you did, I guess, a little bit just after.
2023, yeah, it's the same time.
And this is my first academic job, and I've been struck by how siloed academia is. How just reflect on what's it like to take this interdisciplinary sort of approach in a very disciplinary world.
It's quite challenging, honestly. I'm going to be very honest. The way we are taught within academic settings, by design, we are siloed, right? So if you are a traditional geographer, you would take a lot of interest on geomorphology, landscape dynamics, and so on. But you would barely, focus on engineering dimensions, right? And this is where the challenge has been, right? How we teach our next generation and how they go out and into these roles, as you said, chief resilience officers or chief sustainability managers, and they basically bring that culture into the institutions, right? But we are seeing increasingly interesting ways that universities are coming up with interdisciplinary programs. You mentioned the urban sustainability and resilience MPS, which is a joint venture essentially between the College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Geography and Sustainable Development, and School of Architecture.
Yeah.
And this is where I think a lot of institutions, including the University of Miami, are trying to break these silos, right? So the courses are, you could take courses from Professor Grant, who is an urban planner. You could simultaneously take a course from Joanna Lombard, who is a designer, right? You could simultaneously take a course from public health sciences, from Scott Brown and Miller School of Medicine. And that's where students are getting that exposure.
Mm.
And hopefully these new ways of teaching will translate into new way of practice slowly but surely.
And I know you just took over this program, so
Yeah.
and that was a very optimistic statement, but what do you think the challenges are? Your students are getting out into the real world.
Yeah.
And a lot of times their entry jobs are going to be in very specific disciplines. So they're going to go from this transversal back into a very siloed in some ways, but disciplinary place. What do you think, just opening up the aperture a little bit, what do you think what do we need in order to really, as a profession, and I'm thinking about us broadly as urban planners and academics and chief resilience officers, what do we need to get more interdisciplinary?
I think, from my experience over the last couple of years as part of the director of this program, what I found was that students are increasingly interested, in understanding how climate impacts cities, and how cities and climate co-evolve, and where they fit in. However, there's quite a few tensions, right? There are interdisciplinary tensions, as I said. They come from programs which are really specialized, right, in their undergraduate degree. And suddenly they're exposed to an environment where they have to take class from an architect, an urban planner, a geographer, and public health scientist. And often that creates an interesting environment, but also challenges because they're not exposed to that kind of culture. And the program itself is pretty fast. So there is less time to really explore and meander your ways, but to quickly get along with the system and adopt the culture, right? So that's one of the challenges I see. But we are trying to help students with research assistantship positions, like some of the students worked in the Climate Resilience Institute, right? And they get the professional exposure, understand how actually professionals collaborate across the disciplines.
Yeah.
That's, I think, is increasingly important. While they study, we provide them internships. They have interned in Miami-Dade County, for instance, getting real world exposure. And that has helped them to not only excel in the program, but land good jobs. For instance, the graduates, they have, for instance, recently gone on to the Chief Resilience Officers of North Bay Village, for instance.
Right.
They have graduated recent students into Miami Waterkeeper, which is a nonprofit.
Right.
And that's the other tension I find among students, that a lot of these programs are geared towards high-paying jobs, right? But how do we encourage students also to public service, right? To take on challenges that will improve their communities, cities, right? And we are increasingly trying to encourage this, instill this among students, that it's a wide array opportunity, right? And we need as many students and as many people go out into the engineering innovation side, as many people are needed in the public service side to crack down the problems.
Yeah.
Right?
I just listening to you reminds me of my own journey. And, I landed, well, I was a journalist right out of college, but I landed as a 27-year-old at the New York City Office of Emergency Management. And you're one thing, so one is, you're right, taking public service jobs allows you to impact the world in fundamentally different ways.
Absolutely.
But also, if you're a smart, ambitious kid, there is no better place to take more and more responsibility and be able to and have more and more levers for impact at your disposal than in the public sector. And so it's really, if you land in the right public sector, so there's a real, and then from there I went to Deutsche Bank. And, I got private sector and made some money and did all those things. But I do think that, there is a real value proposition, especially for early career folks, to take those next steps, whether that's a nonprofit or...
It's extremely important because we are seeing increasingly higher fees, and students are highly motivated to take programs. where they quickly transition into real estate
Yeah.
or technology.
Fintech. Yeah.
And which is fine. We want our students to be successful, transform the world.
Yeah.
But they also need, and we have a severe deficit, especially in like sustainability managers, resilience managers space, right? That workforce is also critical to then create that environment in our cities to face resilience and sustainability challenges. And I think students are getting interested, and we see the program, is kind of tripled over the last 3 years. So that tells us that the parents and students and the alumni are all working together. The resilience is a critical issue, and there is an opportunity as well to transform the community.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to come back to interdisciplinarity because, in some ways, you have two papers out in the last couple of months, and I want to talk about both of them.
Sure.
The first one we should talk about is you did a review of 37 resilience plans in Miami-Dade County.
Yes.
All the way from the Resilient 305, which is the most macro
Yes.
sort of vision of resilience, to a variety of the South Florida Water Management District, to
Right.
small cities, to larger cities, like a whole, even neighborhood plans.
Yes.
And try to make sense of how these documents, but the efforts behind those documents relate to one another. I thought it was really fascinating. Can maybe just start by describing that study that you did with a few colleagues from University of Miami.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about maybe what the implications are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, see, plans play a critical role in defining the vision, right? And often we think that projects and investments are necessary, but the plans create the baseline for investments to be structured and really effective in the community, right? And we need long-term plans. We just don't need also plans that are just yearly or 2 yearly. We need long-term plans that provides consistency, right? And often what we have seen in cities, including in Miami-Dade County, for instance, we have 34 municipalities, and then we have the county. And we have the regional agencies like the South Florida Water Management District, there is a planning agency, and they all plan at their respective levels, right? But you have to think about, in a sense, when we started this project, resilience doesn't follow a boundary, right? Climate challenges doesn't follow a boundary. And so if we have to come up with responses, it must be integrated, cohesive, right? And so the goal was to really see whether these plans talk to each other, whether they refer to each other. For instance, there is a green infrastructure plan at the county level, and then there is a green infrastructure plan for most cities, like City of Miami has a green infrastructure plan. City of Miami Beach has a green infrastructure. Are they aligned? And that's the goal, right? And what we found was really interesting, that these plans are really doing well, compared to many other cities across the world. We're in a better place in terms of the granularity of the plans and the density of plans. The number of plans for each sector was really interesting to see, right? So there's a lot of effort. However, what we found, the effort was really channeled strongly towards environmental resilience,
Right.
infrastructural resilience, right? Whereas some of the issues of human behavior dimensions, right? What we call psychological resilience, right? For instance, public health, mental health, right? How disasters play a critical role in mental health is increasingly a concern in the community.
Yeah.
Those issues are kind of fail to, pop up on the top headlines of the plans. And this is one of the major findings that we came out with.
Yeah. And in many ways, I mean, part of it reflects just how this area tends largely, and there are many exceptions to this, but largely tends to think about resilience as how are we going to keep the water off the streets, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Even though we know that in the aftermath of a disaster, how cohesive communities are, how neighbors check on neighbors, how well they are, how healthy they are, and how they have access to services after a disaster, all of those things tend to be as or more important in the outcomes that communities have after disasters.
Oh, yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, See, resilience planning is still being defined, honestly, right? What is a resilience plan still remains a question, right? When we are starting to explore this project, there were four students, and you would see three students are actually named authors in this paper, which is an incredible feat in itself.
Yeah.
And we started with these questions when you go with, scanning the field. What is actually a resilience plan? You would see that we reviewed comprehensive plans, for instance, green infrastructure plans,
Right.
flood mitigation plans,
Right.
resilience 305, which is a dedicated resilience plan. So what we found is interesting, that resilience plan per se, we cannot just separate out as a distinct entity, but we have to find resilience within existing ecosystems,
Yeah.
existing plans. For instance, comprehensive plans in Florida by statute must have a coastal management element, right? We actually looked at it very carefully, how that element speaks to the resilience 305 plan,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is where synergies needs to be built.
Yeah.
If we have to be successful in planning, these plans must be intersecting, especially that are critical and legally binding.
Yeah. I will also say, I think, one of the things that's interesting is that when you talk about how these different um, entities at different levels talk to one another, Resilient 305 was because you allude to it in the paper as if it's Miami-Dade County, but it's the county, the city,
Right.
and the beach, and Miami Beach.
Yes.
It's Greater Miami and the
Yes,
beaches
yes.
is the shorthand, and that was and for full disclosure, yeah, this comes from 100 Resilient Cities. I
Right.
was the president and founder of 100 Resilient Cities, so I have a little stake in this. But the experiment there was a governance experiment,
Exactly.
which is like
Coordination, right?
And we had done one a couple years ago in the Bay Area, where we looked at San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, but they each did separate plans in that
Right.
one. And that didn't work because, I mean, there are many things that worked about it. I wouldn't say it totally didn't work, but it didn't feel cohesive. And so Greater Miami and the Beaches Resilient 305 was an effort to say, oh, we're going to do one plan.
Right.
And
Right.
that, I think it's as your paper finds, is mixed in many ways for a variety of reasons. One, criticism that you point out in the literature, although you don't make it directly necessarily, is that equity, racial equity in particular, is not dealt with head on in that plan. But the other reason why, just to finish my point, is that it's not necessarily a success, or it has its challenges and shortcomings, is that each of the communities still needs to do their own plans underneath. So, it's not, and it's due for an update, now. And so there are a lot of reasons. It did spur this incredible movement of resilience in South Florida. So there are lots of reasons.
I think, as I said, I think Miami-Dade County is one of the most progressive cities as I have seen. My experiences back in India, Australia, I was in Arizona before, and coming here, looking at the plans, I think the ecosystem of plans we have is really astounding. So we are doing pretty well in terms of that, right? Now, what we are doing here is comparing plans that are regional scale to county scale to city scale to also neighborhood level plans. Yeah. So there is some asymmetry in terms of the scale and the vision of these plans, right? So it's quite hard to compare. However, what we found is really interesting and aligning to your equity angle, that it's actually quite difficult for regional and high level plans to explicitly look at equity, because equity issues are neighborhood scale, street scale, right? So we found that the plans, for instance, there's a Black Bay study, there is a Little River Adaptation Area Plan, right? Cutler Bay Flood Mitigation Plan. These are really local resolution, hyper-local plans. Yeah. And we found they're pretty strong on equity. There is actually a diagram in the paper where you look at the rating, right? So 5 people sat down and we rate the plans in terms of, we rate through the sections and say, okay, how many times equity or community or participation, these things are evoked in the plan. That actually tells you the sentiment of the plan, right? Right. And we found that these local plans are doing amazing job, and partly because they're directly in the community. There is strong community participation.
Yeah.
So this plan emerged through bottom-up efforts. And that's where we saw that plans are doing pretty well when they're high resolution. So you're right. Regional plans provide the baseline. And then you have to go in and do these local plans to really bring up the local nuances. And that's where the participatory equity dimensions can be embedded in the plans.
It's interesting. I'm just, and we probably have to move on, but just one last memory that you've evoked for me is, in the plans, the 100 RC plans would take, somewhere between 6, 9 to 12 months.
Right, right.
And they always start out with the loftiest of ambitions.
Right.
But down, then we set a date for publication.
Yes.
And so that everyone has to get all the edits in, and that we're going to, I'm going to come in and we're going to, do a press conference at the mayor's and so on. And at the end, it always gets to a place where people don't want to go on record with something that's too ambitious. And often equity can feel too ambitious. And so some of those things get squeezed out a little bit. And we had a name for it at 100 Resilient City. It was crying time, because everyone got nervous at the end. So I wonder what that looks like, and I think that's probably less as you go more neighborhood scale, because you have fewer cooks.
So that is the question in spatial sciences we call heterogeneity, right? As you move upward on the scale, you are dealing with millions of people, hundreds of stakeholders. It introduces heterogeneity when stakeholders come with different interests, communities with different problems and expectations.
Right.
As you zoom into the micro level, you have homogeneity in the community in terms of race, ethnicity, income patterns, right? Stakeholder management becomes much easier, right? So that's why you'd see they're very strong on participatory equity outcomes.
Right.
As you move up, it becomes a real challenge. And you were right. You have to have set deadlines when you're doing plans, and we also publications. We also have to have set deadlines and expectations. And
So the paper just is called Urban Planning for Climate Resilience, Evaluating Multi-Level Network of Resilience Plans in Miami-Dade County. And we'll put a link in the notes. So I think, one last question before we move on. You have a tool as well. Is the tool is linked in here, but we can link it in the notes as well, where people can actually kind of see the location. Maybe describe the tool.
That's actually a spoiler alert.
Yeah.
We're almost closing up on another paper which dedicatedly focuses on tool development, which is kind of taking the lessons from this. We identified some of the key gaps. And one of the key gaps that the tool addresses that we found out through this was that, the plans are highly grounded on climate models,
right,
which are really global and regional scale models.
Yeah.
If you look at South Florida Climate Change Compact or NOAA models, they're pretty high level, right? So they're looking at physics-based models, they're looking at climate patterns, they're looking at social vulnerabilities, past hazard occurrences. However, what we found the gap is that the lack of local data integration into the models, right? How existing investments that are going in is changing the risk and resilience metrics, right? So that's a gap that we really explicitly highlighted in the paper, and that's what the tool is trying to do. We got a grant from the National Science Foundation CHART program, which is part of the Geo division within NSF. They focus on resilience explicitly, and we are up till date mapping about $29 billion of investments across Miami-Dade County. So these are projects. When the project was initiated, what's the status of the project, how much funding, who is implementing it, where, right? That gives us a baseline of bottom-up local data integration into the models. Then we can understand, okay, this is the risk from high-level data, from physical and social vulnerability. This is the response from the local governments, right? And that's the tool is developing, and also a subsequent paper we are developing on that.
Great. That sounds super interesting, and I look forward to seeing it. So let's pivot to the other paper, which it's called Combining AI with Urban Resilience Planning, a bibliometric analysis of the literature. So it's shorthand, and I want you to
Sure.
like elaborate a little bit. But the shorthand is how AI is being used in resilience planning currently.
Well,
Yeah,
AI is used everywhere,
yeah,
right? On our day-to-day lives, and whatever we do, AI is starting to influence.
yeah,
And so is our field, right? So geography, planning, climate adaptation, all the fields are being impacted progressively by AI tools. Now, this paper is quite different from the earlier one we referenced because of the fact that the earlier paper was really grounded in a local context, that is of the Miami-Dade County and its municipal councils,
right.
which is really looking down into a community and understanding its characteristics. Whereas this paper takes a really 30,000 feet view
Right.
of
It's
what's
a literature
happening.
review.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that way we get a global lens, and we also get a lens of across different institutions and contexts, which is extremely important to see. And as AI is fast progressing, it's always hard to grasp what is exactly happening. How is tangibly our profession is being changed? For instance, climate planning, investments. How tangible impact is visible, right? And where? That's where this paper comes in. And so literature reviews are really powerful in that sense. So this paper is based on nearly 4,000 publications from across the world. So there's a lot of data, a lot of information there to really understand the field view of what's happening with AI.
And what are the trends? You list 4 or 5 trends, but to just give us a little flavor of it.
Well, on the higher level, really, the message was AI is proliferating deeply into the discipline. We thought the penetration was much slower than what we actually found. The number of studies using AI on sustainability and resilience field especially has increased by 4 times since 2020.
These are academic studies?
Yes.
Okay.
This is academic studies that are using case studies on specific cities, but explicitly on, for instance, flood modeling, critical infrastructure modeling, and so on. So they're using AI, and those number of studies is really increased by 4 or 5 fold. And that tells us that we are actually pretty slow in understanding then how researchers are actually using it, right? So there is much more penetration than I was expecting from a research standpoint. And this is kind of first study in that sense globally that provides an understanding of how fast AI is coming to the resilience field and being applied. And then the other aspect was that AI is emerging very powerfully on 2 areas of applications in resilience. One is environmental resilience planning, right? And the other is critical infrastructure planning. So when you look at environmental resilience planning, we found a lot of studies that are increasingly using, deep learning or machine learning on studies that are particularly focusing on remotely sensed satellite image-based observations. You know what? The using satellite data to understand how our environment is changing, for instance, green infrastructure loss, how built environments evolve, right? And satellite data provides a great view. However, it's really cumbersome. If you are using ArcGIS, you would take days to process, right, satellite data and imageries.
Right.
With the AI applications, we are seeing tremendous increase in speed, accuracy, resolution.
Right.
These 3 things. And so, for instance, Google Earth Engine, a lot of studies focus using Google Earth Engine to get data as much as going back to 1990s. And so looking at 30 years of urban development change, how mangroves are changing, how green infrastructure is changing, and heat surface temperatures, right? Very important because extreme heat is a great matter of concern in the resilience field. And we found a lot of studies that are using AI on satellite imageries, image processing, and then trying to understand how built environment change is inspiring and affecting heat surface temperature changes. So that's like a lot of proliferation there on that area. And then the other is critical infrastructure systems, right? As we know, hazards and critical infrastructure core components, right? And we especially found transportation and energy critical infrastructure is being heavily impacted by AI applications.
Yeah.
So for instance, what researchers are doing, they're trying to find agency data fusion, right? Which is very challenging in traditional paradigms, right? When data is coming from your CCTV surveillance, data is coming from GPS receivers, from transit operations, public transit and Uber and so on.
Yeah.
How do we integrate all these data systems and run algorithms on top and make real-time data decisions?
Yeah.
Right? That's why AI is becoming really powerful, because that was a challenge that we are collecting a lot of data, but we are not really benefiting from the data-driven decisions. So energy systems and urban systems are really data-heavy operations. So we see a lot of studies coming up.
I know you don't cover this explicitly, I don't think, in the paper, but do you have thoughts about how this could level the field between the high capacity jurisdictions? I mean, to your point about, you usually need like an ArcGIS trained
Yes.
geographer to like, make some maps and do some analysis and like all of that, and you can do that much more easily if you're a small rural county trying to apply
Yeah.
for funds or do a resilience strategy.
I think you'll see that increasingly AI tools. And when we talk about AI tools, there is this Gen AI tools, which is ChatGPT and so on.
Right.
But then there is a lot of open source AI tools that basically are machine learning based, deep learning based, right? There's a lot of open source applications as well, and that field is rapidly evolving, right? So it's not just the systems that are proprietary or commercially licensed, and then there is a field which is open source. I think as researchers, we are continuing to encourage open source innovations, right? And that's where you'll see, for instance, QGIS, which is a competitor of ArcGIS, has grown tremendously over the last few years.
Yeah.
Because their machine learning integration is much easier there.
Yeah.
Because of the open source community. And so increasingly, as more and more packages are embedded in GIS systems, then we'll have the capacity as a urban manager sitting in a municipal council, you'll have access to those algorithms.
Yeah.
So you could really run faster analysis and get those benefits beyond being stuck into the proprietary paradigm. So it is happening, and it's happening much faster than we thought.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's really super interesting. Combining AI with urban resilience planning. We'll put the link in the notes. So before I let you go, I mean, like you said, you spent time in India and Australia and Phoenix, now here. Like, I would say 4 hotbeds of resilience planning. Your finger is on the pulse in many ways. For our folks listening who are in the field, like, tell us, do you have any hot takes? Like, where do you think the field is going? Obviously, AI and machine learning is one direction, but where else should we be thinking and looking?
Well, I think there is a few trends that I see. I mean, people see what they see, honestly, but how I see it is that there is a lot we have done over the last few decades on trying to understand the problem, right? So physics-based models and this, this is the scenarios of sea level rise in by 2050, 2070, 2100, these areas will go down the water and so on. And we have a lot of data today, right? Mm-hmm. I think where we are moving now is towards decisions, right? And these models have to be dynamic in a sense that over the last few decades, these models haven't moved anywhere. They're almost the same, right? So with the AI and algorithmic approaches, they're getting high resolution, locally embedded. But I think the real challenge lies, and where more investments from professionals needed, is really understanding how these investments cultivate more resilience, whether we are assessing those, right? As I said, $29 billion of investments we mapped, right? Yeah. Over 1.5 years. There is more. Yeah. Now, how those actually changing the risk index, right? Whether we are measuring their co-benefits across urban systems, that could provide a really interesting portfolio for investors as well, foundations as well, which are looking to invest in cities, right? That, this works in this setting. Yeah. This doesn't work in this setting. Then the investments could go in the right places if we continue to evaluate. So moving from broad modeling of risk to really understanding how resilience is shaped in the local ecosystems with the investments and projects ongoing is going to be, then I think, the next big thing. And it has to be done. And then collectively we could really enhance understanding of what works, what doesn't. And of course, AI will play a role in that because it helps you model multiple factors. And however, whether we have the data, how much,
Right.
and we continue to invest onto these areas. And lastly, I would say, I think this is like a circle. You mentioned about governance, right? Both across both the studies and what we are doing in the field, we understand that resilience governance is complex, right? Honestly, over 4,000 studies, right, on the second paper you mentioned.
Yeah.
Not a single study we found where chief resilience officer, for instance, have been surveyed, right, to understand how AI is impacting, right, how they're using AI in day-to-day operations. What is the AI literacy and skills? What is needed, right? And that's where I think capacity building is going to be critical. We know we have a lot of data. We now are having the tools to play with the data. Do we have the skills and capacity, right? And that's where I think a lot of gaps exist in terms of governance, dealing with new technologies to really transform change and action in the community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Sarbeswar Praharaj, thank you very much for being on Resilience in Action.
Thank you for bringing me in here.
Yeah.
But